Hi Year 10, it's Mr. Has a Party here. I thought I'd start this off with some music. That was an unreleased track by the band Nirvana, quite a radical change in direction from Kurt Cobain there, if you know that band. Anyway, let's turn that music off. I thought I'd start that because, it's a bit boring, isn't it? Listen to my voice droning on about RE in all these videos, but we're back to me droning on. So, hope you're all well. This video is the second to last, the penultimate video of new content, new stuff to learn in this Religion, Peace and Conflict unit. After this, we'll have one more unit, one more lesson on content, and then a couple of lessons on revision and how you might answer exam questions, all that kind of stuff. But that will be next week. I said in my previous video that we're going to have 3 lessons this week, but actually we'd have an inset day on Friday, so there would be no lesson then. So we're only having 2 videos up this week. So this is about working for peace. We've done some stuff about what Christians think about war, all the different views. Some Christians are pacifists, just war theory and everything else. But that's to do with whether war is allowed. This is about working for peace. And most Christians, perhaps all Christians, believe that it's actually important to work for peace. Even if you believe in just war theory, you're still going to believe that it's better to have peace in general. So all Christians believe that working for peace, for a more peaceful world, is important. So in this video, we're going to look at 3 different questions. Why is working for peace important to Christians? So why is it a big deal? Is it the most important thing for Christians? That's a kind of looking at a 15-mark style question, similar to the 15-marker that we just looked at in the video on social justice. And then how do Christians work for peace? So that's going to look at some examples of Christians who've worked for peace, or organisations within Christianity that work for peace. In terms of the work that I want you to do, you've got 2 options. Either you can just make notes as we go through on each of those sections about the quotes or the examples based on what's on the slides, on the video, and then what I'm saying as well, which kind of supports that. Or if you've got a printer at home, what you could do is I'm going to put these slides on the Microsoft Teams page, and you could print them off and then annotate the slides. So that just means add to what's on the slides already the extra stuff that I'm saying, and there is quite a lot of extra stuff to add in terms, especially when I've got the quotes. When I'm dealing with quotes, I've mainly just put down the quotes, but you need to be able to explain what those quotes mean or why they're relevant here. So let's start with this slide. This is the first bit. Why is working for peace important to Christians? Well, it's nice and straightforward. It's important to Christians because it says so in the Bible many, many times. And I've got 3 quotes here from the New Testament to explain why working for peace is important. So let's start with the bottom one. It says, make every effort to live in peace with everyone. Hebrews 12:14. Nice, straightforward. That's from the New Testament, but it's not the words of Jesus, but it is from the New Testament. But nice and straightforward. We should try to live in peace with people. Now, I wouldn't say it's probably the most kind of compelling idea for making peace, because it seems to, if I read that initially, I would just think, well, it just means on a personal level, right? Try to live in peace. It doesn't really talk about getting out there and making peace between other people. But still, it's an interesting quote. Okay, then in Luke 1:79, so this is one of the Gospels, it describes Jesus in this way. It says about Jesus that he came to earth to guide our feet into the path of peace, so to make us walk into a path of peace. Again, that seems a bit stronger to me, slightly stronger, because it's kind of saying one of his main reasons to be here, the reason he came to earth, is to guide us into peace. Well, that seems to make it more important. However, the most famous quote about working for peace is undoubtedly this one: "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." It will be, and that's from Matthew 5:9, and that is Jesus saying it. So not only is it very important because it's actually the words of Jesus, but it's also important because it's very directly about saying to make peace. It's saying, blessed are the peacemakers. People who make peace are good people. Now, a little bit of background. It will be good to put this in your notes, this background. This will actually kind of come up again when we look at the Christianity Teachings unit, which is next year. Because this quote is from the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the most important teachings Jesus gives. It's a very long teaching where he talks about lots of different things, which he gave on a mountain. That's why it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And this part of the Sermon on the Mount is taken from a particular section of the Sermon on the Mount called the Beatitudes. Beatitudes is an odd word, but what it is a list of people that Jesus said are blessed. And that just means a list of types of people who God approves of, or who will be blessed by God, or who are a good people to be. And one of those is peacemakers. So blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. So it's saying, people who make peace are special to God, are blessed by God. If you want to think about it in terms of the goals of Christianity, they're probably the sort of people who get to heaven. So all of those quotes show working for peace, being peaceful, making peace with people, important to Christians. Okay, so a 15-mark question. Yeah, it's pretty hard to argue that it's not important to Christians because of blessed are the peacemakers and all those other quotes. But a 15-mark question could ask you, is it the most important thing for Christians, making peace? And I've got some responses here. The first thing to say, and it's important to make a note of this, is that if you're going to say, yes, it is the most important thing, then the quotes to use to agree with the idea that it's the most important thing is go back to the quotes on the last slide. Because all those quotes, particularly blessed are the peacemakers, really make peacemaking sound very important. Here, I'm going to give you some reasons to disagree, to say it might not be the most important thing. And some of this repeats stuff that we looked at in the previous lesson, where we looked at is working for social justice, fighting for social justice, the most important thing. So first quote, no one comes to the Father except through me. For exclusivist Christians, like conservative Protestants and Roman Catholics, what gets you to heaven is believing in Jesus and being forgiven by Jesus. So if a Christian's goal is to get to heaven, and that's what gets you to heaven, then there's a good argument for saying that following Jesus, believing in Jesus, is more important than working for peace in the world. Because Christians would say, however much working for peace you do, you're always going to have done some things wrong in life. And therefore, you're always going to need forgiveness from God. So believing in Jesus, getting that forgiveness is more important than working for peace. Second, in the top right, when a man asked Jesus how he could have eternal life, he answered by saying, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. So this guy is specifically saying, how do I get to heaven? How do I get eternal life in heaven? And he's saying, sell all your possessions, give to the poor. Now, there's a bit of complication with that quote, because we've seen before that actually most Christians don't think that just by doing good actions you can get to heaven. But if we put that to one side, it does seem to be suggesting that giving to the poor is extremely important. He doesn't say, how do I have eternal life? Oh, go and make peace between all countries, then you'll get to heaven. He says, give to the poor. So it seems to suggest giving to the poor is more important than making peace. Okay, let's go round in a clockwise direction then. Holy war. Well, you could say about holy war's a good one to include, because in the Bible, and you've got quotes on this from previous lessons, God tells the Israelites to go to war. Sometimes, there's situations where he says you must go to war, and he's quite kind of ruthless about the kind of war he wants. He calls for people to be killed and so on. So it could be said, well, peacemaking can't be the most important thing because sometimes God commands people to go to war. That's a good one to include in a 15 marker because there's an easy criticism. We talked about this before, but liberal Protestants would say, liberal Christians would say, actually, those parts of the Bible cannot be right. The people who wrote them down must have been mistaken. God can't have commanded that because God is all loving. He would never command war in that way. So you've got a good kind of SE and then a plus E for that one. Lastly, coming around in a clockwise direction, seek justice, defend the oppressed. This is a kind of tricky one to use, but I thought I'd put it in there. So the Bible is, this is a social justice quote really. The Bible is saying, seek justice, try and make it a fairer world, defend the oppressed, defend people who are discriminated against, who have prejudice against them, and so on and so on. Now, what you could say, this could work in two ways. One, you could say, well, if you seek justice and defend the oppressed, well, sometimes you might have to use violence to do that. If people are being oppressed, if we want to make the world fairer, sometimes you've got to use violence to force people to treat people fairly. So you might say that was against peacemaking. You might say, well, actually, that suggests that it's really important to get justice, and sometimes you might have to use violence to do it. On the other hand, you could also argue that quote promotes peacemaking, because this is maybe a strange way of looking at it, but I think it's an important way. If the world is full of injustice and there are people being oppressed, then you're not going to have a very peaceful society, because one group is always going to feel hard done by, excluded, not treated fairly, and so there's likely to be conflict and there may be even violence between people in that group. So you might say, well, this quote is actually in favour of peacemaking, because one of the things you need to do to have peace is to make sure there's justice in society. So that's another, you can argue both ways based on that quote. I hope that makes sense. Do let me know if there's anything unclear about what I've said in this slide in particular. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, the next section is how do Christians work for peace? And in this section, we're going to go through 3 examples of two are groups and one's an individual who have worked for peace in various ways, so tried to make the world a more peaceful place. First example is Christian CND, and CND stands for the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament is a group that believes in getting rid of nuclear weapons. Christian CND is the Christian branch of that group. So if you look at the symbol on the top left of the slide, you've got the cross at the top, obviously the symbol of Christianity. You've got a dove, which in Christianity is a symbol of peace. It's also a symbol of the Holy Spirit, but it's a symbol of peace too. And then underneath you've got this sign, the circle with the lines inside it. Now that is often mistakenly called the peace sign. It's not actually a symbol of peace. It's a more specific symbol. It's used to symbolize peace, but it's more specifically, it's the symbol of CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And the whole point of CND is, get rid of nuclear weapons. Now, so Christian CND works in this country. It campaigns for what's called unilateral nuclear disarmament by the United Kingdom. Now, this needs a bit of explaining, so you need to make some notes on this. Unilateral nuclear disarmament, uni means one, and unilateral means that they campaign for the UK to get rid of their nuclear weapons, even if no other country gets rid of its nuclear weapons. To put that into a bit of context, the opposite of unilateral nuclear disarmament is multilateral nuclear disarmament. Some people would say they want to get rid of nuclear weapons, but they would argue you can only do it if every country that's got nuclear weapons agrees at the same time to get rid of their nuclear weapons. The reason why some people think about it in those ways is because they think, well, the reason countries have nuclear weapons is generally not to use them. The reason they have them is as a deterrent to stop other countries from using them. So this is what happened during the Cold War. America had nuclear weapons, and then Russia built up its stock of nuclear weapons, and gradually they built up more and more nuclear weapons, but not to use, but to deter the other side from using theirs. The idea would be, if America shoots one of its nuclear weapons, then immediately when it knows this is happening, Russia will shoot some of its nuclear weapons. And then both sides, their countries will be horribly destroyed. They'll suffer amazing amounts of damage. So the whole idea is, if you don't want to get attacked with nuclear weapons, the best thing to do is get nuclear weapons to stop other people attacking you. It was a policy of what they called mutually assured destruction. In other words, every side knew that if they used their nuclear weapons, then the whole world is going to be destroyed, and no one wants that. Now, so that is the situation we find ourselves in, where there's lots of countries, including our own, with nuclear weapons, but not really wanting to use them. They're more there to keep the peace. The problem is, CND would say, is that while they're there, there's still a risk that people will use them. If we didn't have nuclear weapons, then of course we couldn't use them. So it's still, even though everyone having nuclear weapons might, create this situation of peace because no one wants other people to fire at them, it still would be more peaceful if no one had nuclear weapons at all. People who believe in multilateral nuclear disarmament believe, well, the only way to do that is everyone get rid of their nuclear weapons at the same time, because that means that no one's in a situation where they've got rid of theirs and other people still have theirs and they feel under threat. However, it's very difficult to get everyone to agree and to trust each other so that can happen. As a result of that, some people call for unilateral nuclear disarmament, and that's what Christian CND calls for. It wants the UK to get rid of all of its nuclear weapons to set an example to other countries. If they do it first, the idea is other countries are then more likely to do it because they feel less of a threat from the UK, and so on and so on. So that's what Christian CND campaigns for. To do this, they do it in a number of ways. Peaceful protests, so marches and things like that. Petitions, so that's, they'll have a statement saying something like the UK should get rid of we believe the UK should get rid of all nuclear weapons, and they get hundreds, thousands of people to sign it, and then they send it to the government. Last thing they might do, or I mean, there's other things too, but the last example I'm giving here is they often do this, holding religious services at military sites. The idea would be to go to a place, a military base that's associated with nuclear weapons, like the place where the Trident submarine is in this country, which is the nuclear submarine that we have. They would go there, and outside of the army base, they would conduct some kind of like a church service or prayers or something like that. The idea would be to it's kind of a public show to bring people's attention to it, to kind of say, look, we're Christians, this is what we believe in, and this place here goes against what Jesus believed in. So, yeah, that's the idea. So those are the sort of things they do, and yeah, that's what a unilateral nuclear disarmament is. Okay, next one, Pax Christi. This is a Catholic organisation. I think it says it underneath the logo there. It says International Catholic Movement for Peace. Pax Christi is a Latin phrase meaning the peace of Christ. Latin is a language that's historically been very associated with the Catholic Church. Until the 1960s, Catholic services used to be in the Latin language, so that is why they use Latin there. Now, it's a Catholic organisation. It whereas Christian CND is for all Christians. It campaigns more broadly for peace and non-violence throughout the world. Not just nuclear weapons, but against violence of all kinds. They believe in following the non-violent teachings of Jesus. It's interesting because, Catholics came up with just war theory, and some people who believe in just war theory might also support Pax Christi. You don't have to be a complete pacifist to believe that peace is a good thing, of course. Most people believe that peace is good. It's just that some people think you sometimes need to go to war. So Pax Christi, yeah, it's perhaps a bit more emphasises pacifism than the rest the rest of the Catholic Church, but it doesn't mean you have to be a pacifist to be part of it. So what do they do to campaign for peace? Well, here's some of the things they do. Organise debates on the morality of nuclear weapons. So that means they'd have a public debate with a representative on their side and someone who was for having nuclear weapons, and they would, the idea would be that they would hope that they could win that debate in public, and therefore make more people believe in their cause. They would call upon governments to spend less money on weapons. Because the Catholic Church is the biggest church in the world, throughout the world, and Pax Christi is a key associate with the Catholic Church, what they say has quite a lot of weight, quite a lot of importance. So when they'll put these big statements out as to try and pressure governments, spend less on the military, spend less on weapons, spend more on helping the poor and things like that. Last thing they do is a bit more of a specifically religious thing. They might organise days of prayer and fasting, calling on God to bring peace in troubled parts of the world. So if there's a war going on in a certain part of the world, they will pray. They'll have a day of prayer and announce it and try and get as many people involved to pray for that for the war to be ended. But they also might do fasting. That's something that happens particularly in the Catholic tradition, but quite a lot of Christians do it when there's something they're very serious about, when they want to show their commitment, when they want to show their devotion to God. Sometimes Catholics will fast. That means not eat for a day. And so they might do that and dedicate that fasting to peace in the world. So it's a mixture of things they're doing between kind of more normal kinds of protest, political protest, and then more religious things. Okay, the last one, Dietrich Bonhofer. So this is a person, not an organisation. So, and this is, I've put this in deliberately by way of a contrast, because those two first organisations we've got are organisations that work peacefully to bring about peace. So they do peaceful protest to bring about peace. Dietrich Bonhofer is an example of how some Christians believe that it's sometimes necessary to use violence to work for peace. Now, Dietrich Bonhofer is an interesting individual because he was a minister in the German Lutheran Church. A minister is like a priest or a vicar. Different churches have different words for it. They use the word minister. And he was a minister during the Second World War, at the time when Adolf Hitler was in power in Germany. And this was a very difficult time for everybody, of course, in the country, but for Christians in the country, because what would they had a lot of moral dilemmas to face. To what extent are they going to stand up and fight against Hitler, against the things he was doing, against the beliefs he had, which went against Christian teachings on social justice, that went against Christian teachings on pacifism, and so on and so on. what were they going to do to stand up and fight against those things? And some ministers did very little. Some actually supported Hitler, which is, obviously goes completely against Christian beliefs. But some did oppose Hitler, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the key people Christians who opposed Hitler. In fact, he was so opposed to Hitler that he believed that it was necessary to take Hitler's life. So he was involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. So he believed that bringing about peace, ending the Nazi regime, was so important that he was willing to use violence to kill Hitler to bring about peace. So, and it's just a good example as a contrast. If you wrote a 6-mark essay about how Christians work for peace, you can say, well, some Christians have decided that bringing about peace is so important that sometimes violence can be used to bring about peace, and he's a good example. He was not successful, obviously, in his attempt to assassinate Hitler. He was arrested and he was executed by the Nazi government. So yeah, really interesting character. That's the last slide for this lesson, so make sure you have your notes on these 3 sections. We'll do a little bit more on how you might put some of this into exam questions when we come to the revision stuff, but again, you can see, a bit like with the social justice lesson I did, when you look at how Christians work for peace, there's a lot of examples here that don't lend themselves to a traditional SEE answer. So when you're looking at Bonhoeffer or Pax Christi or Christian CND, you're probably going to be thinking about, if you're explaining them in a paragraph, about statement, explain, expand your explanation, rather than a kind of statement, evidence, explanation. It's going to be a long, expanded explanation of what these Christians do to work for peace. Don't worry about that too much. I will talk about that more in a future video. Okay, hope that helps. Bye.